Welcome back to our lectures on markets, supply and demand. We've already thoroughly analyzed the demand side of the market. Now we're going to start analyzing the supply side of the market. So first we'll define supply. What is supply? Well, the definition sounds highly similar to demand, so sort of pay attention here because we're really only changing out one word, right? So it's the various amounts of an item, of a good or a service or a resource that sellers, typically producers, sellers are willing and able to make available for sale at a series of prices for a specified amount of time, ceteris paribus, other things being equal. So again, the most important determinant of quantity supplied is the price in the market, right? So just like we had a law of demand, we're going to have a law of supply, right? And in this case, there is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. A direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. If price goes up, if price rises, quantity supplied rises, and if price goes down, price decreases, quantity supplied falls. Now this should make sense to you intuitively. It's not quite as intuitive as the demand side because we're used to being buyers in markets. We like to spend money. So the typical American, typical human being, they understand demand better because we are all buyers in markets. But think of yourself as the seller. Now you have to think of price no longer as an obstacle. It's actually a reward. So higher prices entice producers to sell more of a good or service. Likewise, if you think about what happens at your typical factory, a manufacturing firm, whenever a firm decides to produce more of an item, a good or service, right, a widget, they need to take on more cost. And this is something you would analyze in great detail if you take microeconomics. You talk about fixed cost and variable cost and how variable costs are directly related to the level of output. But suffice it to say for now, if a producer wants to produce X number more units, there's going to be more labor and definitely more raw materials involved, and definitely probably some more utilities for the factory and such. Producers are only willing and able to take on those costs if the price of the product they are selling rises. Right? And likewise, if prices fall, they're going to look to cut those costs. So that explains pretty much the reason why there is this law of supply, a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So here we have the law of supply graphically, right? So if we start at P1, a very low price, this producer is willing and able to make available for sale only Q1. And as price rises to P2, the producer increases quantity to Q2, and so on P3 out to Q3. So let's quickly just throw in there some real prices. So if price in this market were only $2 per unit, the seller is willing and able to make available for sale, let's say quantity 1 would be 5. If price increases to, say, $5 per unit, this producer may be willing and able to make available for sale 10 items per week or per month, whatever the time period might be. And if price increases all the way to say $15 per unit, heck, the producer might be willing and able to make available for sale 20 units per week. Just like we started off studying demand with the corn market and the demand for corn, we're going to use the same textbook example from McConnell and analyze the supply market and the supply of corn. So here we have the decisions of one farmer, right? Again, we have on our vertical axis price, on our horizontal axis quantity, and we have on the right-hand side quantitatively the demand schedule. So we see the prices at $1, $2, $3, $4, and $5 per bushel. And we have quantity supplied from 5 to 60. So all we did was simply take our quantitative data on the right and we plotted it out on our graph and we labeled it and we drew our supply curve. So our supply curve is upward sloping. It shows the direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Right? Price goes up, quantity supplied goes up, price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. Again, it's very important that you understand this. Ceteris paribus, other things being equal, the most important determinant of quantity supplied is the price in the market. So a movement along a single supply curve is caused by a change in the price of the market. We are also very infrequently interested in one single producer's supply curve. This would be something you might investigate in good detail if you take a microeconomics class and you look at something like a situation where there's only a few producers, like an oligopoly. But for now, remember, we're trying to learn the basics about supply and demand. And we said this in the beginning when we defined markets, that there's a very large number of sellers and a large number of buyers. So again, we're not going to spend much time on one single producer supply curve. We're more interested in the market supply. So again, to get to the market supply, all we would do is we would sum up the quantity supplied by all the sellers in the market at every price level, and that would give us the market supply. So this graph on this PowerPoint slide reiterates something I said earlier, but it's important to remember. What causes a change in quantity supplied? So if price goes up, quantity supplied goes up, a movement along the supply curve, an increase in quantity supplied. And if price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. So again, other things being equal, the most important determinant of quantity supplied is the price in the market, right? So a change in price causes a change in quantity supplied. However, just like we studied demand, there are non-price determinants for supply as well. And there are 6 of them. Let's bring these up, all 6, and then we'll talk about the importance of each of these. And then like we did with demand, we will analyze how they shift the curve. So the first 4 are the most important. Resource prices. Now it's important that you also identify the idea that when we use the term resources, land, capital, labor, and entrepreneurability, resources are simultaneous to inputs and factors of production. So economists use those terms interchangeably. So if you say resource prices or prices of an input or prices of a factor or factor of production, right? Those are all the same thing to an economist. So get used to that idea, that lingo, that language. Resources, the economic resources, land, capital, labor, and entrepreneurability, are the same thing as inputs or factors of production. Then we have technology. We're going to talk about how changes in technology will change the curve. Right? Taxes and subsidies. Taxes are easy, right? Businesses produce a good, they sell it, and they must pay taxes. If they're a corporation, they pay corporate income tax. If they're sole proprietor or partner, their tax structure is a bit different, but every time a good is produced and sold, businesses pay taxes on that production and sale on that revenue. Subsidies is the one students are typically not quite as familiar with. You can think of subsidies as taxes in reverse. In other words, the government actually takes tax revenues generated from some source and hands it out to producers. And you say, well, why would they ever consider doing that? Well, we can use this subsidy idea. We have some good real-life application when we talk about some specific ideas like education. The education market receives a lot of government subsidies. Likewise, if you think about alternative energy, things like wind and solar panel, we'll talk about subsidies. The government taking tax revenues generated from somewhere and handing them out to producers of renewable sources of energy, and why that occurs. A number of sellers is exactly what it says. Number of sellers is how many producers there are in the market. Now, price expectations. Sometimes producers will increase or decrease supply based on where they think prices are heading in the market. And then the final one is prices of other goods. And this last non-price determinant, this will have some good application when we analyze a producer who can easily alter production between one or several different items. So this introduces you to the ideas of the non-price determinants of supply. In the next lecture, we will talk about how these non-price determinants of supply either increase supply or decrease supply, either shift the curve to the right or to the left.